What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Awesemo channel, and I'm here today to talk some college football DFS. It is Tuesday, November the 2nd, and it is the first week of action. That means weekday college football slates, and we will be breaking it down for you here at Awesemo. Before we get started, hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. Digging into the slate, we have 3 games up, 3 games down today, so we will get right into this. This is our player usage tool that you can find at our site, showing you all the opportunity for these players. In the first game on the slate today is Ball State taking on Akron. A really interesting game here. These teams obviously took a beating in non-con play, now inside the MAC. A little bit of buy low opportunity on some of them. Ball State, 19.5-point favorite here, 57.5-point total. This is approaching a 3-touchdown spread in favor of Ball State. They have one of the few secure quarterbacks on this slate in Drew Plitt. He is somewhat active as a rusher, 58 yards on the ground, pretty active as a passer. This Ball State team is very pass-heavy overall, 53% pass. So in competitive games, Plitt certainly benefits. And he's a strong play today solely on matchup. And then the fact that he's one of the few quarterbacks that has job security today. So Plitt, he's a fairly solid play overall. In the run game, you are going to see a timeshare between Carson Steele and Will Jones. Will Jones is slightly more active in the pass game, but overall the opportunity is fairly consistent for these two. Carson Steele has been more efficient, and he typically leads the backfield in raw carries. That is where you want to look against a Akron defense, allowing nearly 250 yards on the ground. But Will Jones is also very, very cheap. He's a punt play worth getting to in this matchup. There are 3 main receivers for Ball State. Justin Hall, who's very active in the run game as well. He's averaging about 3 carries per game. But Justin Hall, he's averaging 7.9 targets per game, 62 yards. That's narrowly ahead of Ja'Shawn Jackson, who has 60 yards and 7 targets himself. And then Johannes Tyler, he's actually seen the most targets over the last 4 games, 8.3 for him. These are the 3 wide receivers virtually on the field for every single play. Hall is the best play because he has that solid floor in the run game, but all 3 are in play. All 3 have similar upside. I think Tyler's the cheapest viable one, but you can play any of these guys. Tight end Cody Rudy's labeled as a running back on DraftKings. Makes him very hard to get to, but he's the tight end, not a running back. On Akron, we've had a quarterback by rotation committee, whatever you want to call it this year. DJ Irons is the main guy, and he's expected to start. He was banged up earlier in the year, but he's basically just a pure dual threat signal caller. Zach Gibson, he ceded work to Irons in the last game. Now, they both have played together, so there is a little bit of risk here that you could see both these guys, but Irons looks like the clear starter at very least. He has good rushing upside, 305 yards on the ground so far this year, only about 150 per game as a passer. But Ball State's defense is allowing 171 rush yards per game. So Irons is in play at 5K. He's very cheap, and it's only a 3-game slate. In the run game, we've seen this kind of ebb and flow. Jonzel Norrells looked like the lead back in their most recent game. But prior to that, we had Blake Hester leading the team in carries in their 3 prior matchups. Anthony Williams is also involved here too. So you have a 3-way committee, which has slowly moved towards Jonzel Norrells. So he is kind of this GPP play on the basis that he's been receiving more work. But this could go back to a 3-way committee split right down the middle at any point in time. Norrell's just the tentative best play here. In the receiving game, you have Kanata Mumpfield as the leading receiver, 495 yards in the year, averaging 8 targets per game over the last 4. He's been working alongside Michael Matheson, who operates out of the slot a lot. He has 406 yards in the year. Matheson, much, much cheaper than Mumpfield, so that would be where I prefer to look. Their target volume on the year is pretty consistent. Mumpfield is kind of bolstered by this 14-target game he saw 2 weeks ago. Outside of that, you're looking at kind of a rotation at wide receiver. George Qualls is somebody who did not play in their last game. That allowed Andre Williams to see increased snap share. If Qualls plays, I think they split time, but if not, Williams would become a better play. They're 34 and 3,500. This is something we'll need to monitor pregame. Tony Grimes is basically just a rotation receiver, and Tristan Brank, only 19 targets on the year, a little more expensive. One of these 3K receivers likely has a decent game. It's just going to be difficult to predict who it is. Ranking them, if Qualls plays, number 1. If Qualls is out, Williams is number 2 for me. Brank is more of just a low upside option, playing the tight end position. Game 2, we have Miami, Ohio taking on Ohio. This is a 7-point spread, 52-point total. I did bet Miami, Ohio when they were 6.5. But overall, a lot of advantages towards this Miami, Ohio team. Both these teams are extremely slow. Miami, Ohio is closer to balanced in pass rate, but Ohio is just going to be a run-first team no matter what. In the past game, Brett Gabbert regained his starting job over A.J. Mayer. Both of these guys have played. Both these guys have split time. So this is another quarterback room where we do not have one quarterback projected to play the entire game. They could split. I would tentatively side with Gabbert, but there is no real job security here. In the run game, Tyrell Shelton has emerged kind of as the lead runner here. He's out-touched Keon Mosey in each of the last 2 games he played, but it's going to be a timeshare here. Upwards of 4 backs active with Mosey, Shelton, Kevin Davis very active in the pass game, as is Kenny Tracy. They do have a decent matchup here. Miami, Ohio against Ohio. Ohio allows over 232 rushing yards per game, but the only player averaging over 10 touches per game is Shelton. He would be the preferred play here, but just a GPP target. And then in the pass game, if you're stacking Gabbert, Jack Sorensen is the target leader. He's averaging 8.5 targets per game over their last 4 games, 84 yards for him. Mac Hippenhammer is way cheaper, so he's a consolation prize worth talking about. He's also averaging 8.8 targets per game over their last 4. Hippenhammer is by far the better price-adjusted play to stack with Gabbert, who you could stack. You also could run him naked, 93 rushing yards for Gabbert. He's fine. Outside of that, you have a rotation. Jalen Walker is the wide receiver 3, but this team uses a lot of double tight end sets with Jack Calderon, with Andrew Homer. So outside of Hippenhammer and Sorensen, you will have to throw some darts, little less secure there. For Ohio, Curtis Rourke regained the starting job over Armani Rogers, expecting both quarterbacks to play in this spot. Armani Rogers is a far better rusher, but Rourke is serviceable on the ground himself. Neither passer has shown much upside here. That is because Ohio is one of the slowest and pass-heaviest teams in college football. You're also dealing with potentially limited snaps for both of them if they both play in this game, making them very hard to get to outside of GPPs. Stacking is also difficult because this team uses a lot of 2 tight end sets. The top 2 receivers are Cameron Odom and Isaiah Cox. Isaiah Cox has moved ahead of Tyler Walton in recent weeks. Even though Tyler Walton still holds the team lead in targets, his route rate has taken a sharp dive this year. So it is Isaiah Cox and Cameron Odom as the top 2 options. Ryan Lerman is the tight end, averaging only 2.8 targets per game. And then you have a couple ancillary pieces, a Miles Cross and Alec Burton. These guys are just out there for a few snaps here and there. Miles Cross is another person siphoning off a few touches from Tyler Walton, making him harder to target. But overall, it's Odom, it's Cox. Outside of that, you're probably just playing Lerman or moving on from Ohio's passing attack. In the run game, they do use 2 backs. They use Demontre Tuggle and O'Shane Allison. The opportunity for these 2 is fairly even. Tuggle has been far more efficient, but Allison has a lot more work in the pass game, and they're projected to be down here. So Allison at 4,500 is a better price-adjusted play, but ultimately, this is still a decent matchup. Miami, Ohio allows over 150 rush yards per game, and this Ohio team just runs the ball so frequently that you could potentially target one of these guys. Allison or Tuggle are the 2 names to mention here. Final game, we have Eastern Michigan taking on Toledo. Another tough quarterback situation. Ben Bryant, Preston Hutchinson. Bryant has emerged as the starter after Hutchinson played a little bit to begin the year, so I think there is some job security here. He's not really mobile, 21 yards on the ground, but he does have a decent amount of passing volume. Eastern Michigan, they're passing about 52.5% of the time, and they're underdogs here, 9-point underdogs to Toledo in a game with a 52.5-point total. Just tough. These are 2 of the better defenses in the conference, especially against the pass. So Eastern Michigan definitely is not going to be going into an easy matchup here against Toledo. Ben Bryant, for that reason, is a tournament play more than anything, but he does have some job security, so potentially a cash game play if you're worried about the other starters. In the run game, they basically are using a 3 to 4 back committee. It is Darius Boone. It is Juwan Hamilton, Samson Evans, and even Bryson Moss carried 7 times in their last game. The only player averaging over 10 touches per game is Darius Boone, but his efficiency has been so bad that you have seen this kind of shift towards Juwan Hamilton in recent weeks. Hamilton has out-carried Boone in the last 2 games. With that said, they're just cannibalizing each other so much that none of these backs see significant volume. Toledo also plays fairly solid run defense, so it would be Juwan Hamilton. Otherwise, it would be move on. In the receiving game, you have a couple really interesting options. Hassan Beydoun should not be cheaper than Dylan Drummond. He has more receiving yards and he has more targets. Then he averages more receiving yards per game, albeit slightly. That is still not worth $1,200 difference in salary. So Beydoun is a better play than Drummond. He should be far more owned, but Drummond is a good play himself. You have Beydoun averaging 7.9 targets per game, Drummond 7.5. So both very, very active. The wide receiver 3 is actually Zach Westmoreland. He has taken over, but he still does not play a full complement of snaps. This team uses a lot of 2 tight end sets with Bryson Cannon, Gunnar Oaks, and Thomas Odukoya. So it's a spot where you have Westmoreland projected around 40 to 60% of the route, somewhere in there, averaging only 3 targets per game. I would rather just find the money and pay up for a guy like Beydoun. But Bryson Cannon, he's also active. He's averaging 3.8 targets per game. Maybe you get to him at 4,100. But I think like instead of paying for Cannon at 41, I would rather just play like a hip and hammer at 49 and change my construction a little bit. A lot more willing to punt on some of these timeshare running backs and some of the really ancillary receivers like Westmoreland. I would rather find the secure opportunity with like Beydoun and some of the other alphas. On Toledo, we have had another quarterback change throughout the year here. Daquan Finn has started the last few games, and he's played very good football on the ground. A strong dual threat, 351 yards already on the ground, split time with Carter Bradley to begin the year. But his passing volume leaves a little bit to be desired. Toledo is an up-tempo team overall, so Daquan Finn has had games with elite ceilings as far as pass attempts go. Has not been very efficient, but in a competitive game here, you could see a ceiling out of Finn, and he's also just so active in the run game that he takes advantage of the 195 yards that Eastern Michigan allows on the ground. By far the best matchup here. In the run game, Bryant Koback is the only true feature back on the slate, and it comes more so from play volume because he does split a little bit of time with Jaquez Stewart and Micah Kelly. They handle change of pace touches, but Koback is still easily the leader here. He averages 17.9 touches per game. He's very active as a receiver. He has 23 targets on the year, averages over 100 yards per game. So Koback is very clearly the safest running back play just as far as volume goes. Now, I do think he's a priority on the slate. In the receiving game, it is Isaiah Winstead, Devin Maddox, and Bryce Mitchell. They're the main 3 receivers, but they all play about 75% of the routes. Winstead is the target leader, Maddox is the receiving yardage leader, and Bryce Mitchell, he's kind of just below them both in terms of targets and receiving yards, but he is 3,900, and he would be one of the guys I look to if you are playing a receiver below 4K, but I don't think you necessarily need to. And part of the reason they don't have elite target ceilings is because Jerwan Newton, Danzel McKenzie-Lewis, even tight end Jamal Turner, they rotate onto the field somewhere between like 20 to 30% of the snaps. For tight end Jamal Turner, it's a little more than that, but Newton and Danzel McKenzie-Lewis are involved enough to just siphon away some targets from Winstead, Maddox, and Mitchell that it's kind of hard to get to them. But I think you could get to them in stacks for sure if you're playing Finn. We have seen him with the ceiling overall, so he is a decent look. But these are the MAC teams. The only bet I have tonight is Miami, Ohio. If you have questions, feel free to leave those in the comment section. Let me know your favorite play overall. Would love to hear it. I'm Matt Gajewski on Twitter at @Matt_Gajewski. Hit the thumbs up button on the way out. And thanks again, guys, for watching. We'll see you again next time.